In the shadow of Sparta's iron reputation, there is a story that doesn't fit. A story of betrayal, whispers of secret letters, and a man who stood at the pinnacle of Greek glory, only to die walled up, starving, in the temple of a goddess. His name was Pausanias, the Spartan regent who commanded at Plataea, crushed the Persian invasion, and brought honor to his people. But behind that shining victory lurked rumors of arrogance, treachery, and forbidden alliances with the very empire Sparta had sworn to destroy. So, what went wrong? How does a celebrated war hero go from savior of Greece to a prisoner entombed by his own city? Stay with me until the end of this video, because this story of ambition, paranoia, and betrayal ends in one of the darkest, most chilling deaths in ancient history. To understand Pausanias' downfall, we must begin with his bloodline. Pausanias was not just another Spartan officer. He was born into the Aegeid dynasty, one of Sparta's two royal families. The nephew of King Leonidas, the very Leonidas who died at Thermopylae, Pausanias carried the burden of expectation on his shoulders. When Leonidas fell holding the pass against Xerxes' armies, his young son Pleistarchus was far too young to rule. And so, Pausanias stepped into power, not as king, but as regent, a caretaker of the throne ruling in the name of a child. But here's where the danger lies. A regent always has power, but never security. He leads armies, commands respect, but knows deep down that when the boy comes of age, that power must be handed back. It was a role that demanded loyalty and restraint. Pausanias had the first, the second, not so much, because very soon, the regent would taste a kind of glory that few mortals ever know, and that glory would change him forever. Picture the year 479 BC. Greece stood on the edge of annihilation. Xerxes had already burned Athens, the smoke of its temples still haunting the sky. The memory of Thermopylae was raw, a noble sacrifice, but a bitter wound. At Salamis, the Persians had been checked at sea, but their armies still roamed the land, vast and relentless. One last clash would decide the fate of Greece. At Plataea, it was Pausanias who held command of the Hellenic League. Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, and countless smaller allies, all eyes turned to the Spartan regent. For once, fractured city-states stood shoulder to shoulder, united under his leadership. For days, the battlefield was a test of nerves. The Persians, commanded by Mardonius, outnumbered the Greeks and taunted them into open combat. The Greeks, suspicious of each other and unsure of strategy, nearly collapsed into chaos. Tension hung like a storm before lightning. Then, at last, came the charge. Bronze clashed against wicker shields. Spears splintered. The roar of battle shook the plain. Men fought not only for survival, but for the survival of their civilization. And when the bloodied ground finally fell silent, it was Pausanias who had triumphed. Mardonius lay dead, crushed beneath the weight of Greek resolve. The Persian host broke and fled. The invasion ended. Pausanias was hailed as a savior. Songs were sung, offerings dedicated. He was the man who had avenged Leonidas and Thermopylae. But here lies the danger. Victory feeds pride, and pride feeds ambition. Soon, the regent of Sparta would begin to dream not as a servant of his city, but as a ruler in his own right. Flush with victory, Pausanias pushed further. He led campaigns into Cyprus and Byzantium, driving back Persian influence. His power seemed unstoppable. But something strange began to happen. The stories say that in Byzantium, Pausanias adopted the customs of Persia. He no longer dined like a Spartan, but like an Eastern satrap. He wore flowing robes. He surrounded himself with foreign guards. He demanded honors that Spartans considered shameful, almost godlike. And then came the letters. Whispers circulated that Pausanias had opened secret negotiations with Xerxes himself, that he had promised to betray Greece in exchange for marriage to the king's daughter, that he dreamed of ruling not just Sparta, not just Greece, but all of Asia under Persian backing. Whether true or exaggerated, the rumors spread like wildfire. Allies who once followed him began to turn away. The Athenians, in particular, grew suspicious of his arrogance. The hero of Plataea was beginning to look less like a defender of freedom, and more like a man corrupted by ambition. And back in Sparta, his enemies were sharpening their knives. Spartan law was merciless when it came to loyalty. No matter how high you rose, no matter what victories you claimed, suspicion of treason could drag even a hero before the judgment of the city. And so Pausanias was recalled. The savior of Plataea returned to Sparta, not to celebration, but to interrogation. The accusations were grave: treason, secret correspondence with Persia, betrayal of the very Greece he had saved. Imagine the scene: the stern council of ephors, the grim faces of Spartan elders, and Pausanias, a man who once commanded the fate of nations, now reduced to defending his honor with only words. But here was the problem. The evidence was thin. The letters that supposedly bound him to Xerxes were gone. The men who whispered of his Persian sympathies dared not testify openly. The case was built on shadows, not stone. And so Pausanias was acquitted, legally innocent. But in Sparta, acquittal was not the same as forgiveness. He walked free, but stripped of trust. He would never again be granted high command. His reputation was poisoned, his allies melted away. The whisper of treason lingered in every corridor, in every glance cast his way. Most men would have withdrawn into silence, accepted disgrace, faded into the shadows. But not Pausanias. The hunger for power still burned. The taste of command still lingered. And if Sparta would not allow him to rise again, then he would find another stage to play his game. Stripped of authority, Pausanias was a man without a throne, a lion without a pride. But ambition does not die quietly. He drifted back to Byzantium, the city he had once commanded with glory. But now he returned not as a celebrated general, but as a private man, carrying the shadow of disgrace. And in that shadow, something in him began to twist. Reports from the time describe him as restless, unpredictable. He was no longer content to live within the rigid boundaries of Spartan discipline. Instead, he reached for dangerous allies. The whispers said he spoke with the Helots, Sparta's vast population of enslaved laborers, beaten down by centuries of oppression. To them, he promised freedom. To himself, he promised an army. It was a gamble as audacious as it was reckless. If true, it meant Pausanias was no longer merely flirting with treason. He was openly conspiring against the very foundation of Sparta's power. The Athenians, already wary of him, had seen enough. They expelled him from Byzantium. Word reached Sparta. Once again, the regent turned outcast was recalled. By now, his circle of allies was shrinking to nothing. His reputation, once radiant, had collapsed into scandal. He was isolated, hounded, cornered. And yet, Pausanias refused to surrender the dream that had consumed him. The dream of Persia. The dream of power beyond the narrow confines of Sparta. A dream that was about to lead him straight into a deadly trap. By now, the evidence was damning. A captured courier allegedly carried letters that tied Pausanias directly to Persian conspiracies. The net closed around him. Pausanias fled, not to a fortress, not to an army, but to the temple of Athena of the brazen house in Sparta itself. Sanctuary, a place where no Spartan hand could touch him. But the Spartans were cunning. They did not drag him out. They walled him in. Brick by brick, they sealed the doors. Pausanias was trapped, starving, his cries echoing through the temple walls. And then came the final blow. His own mother, Theano, walked to the temple. She carried a single brick. Without a word, she placed it in the wall. A silent message: "You are no son of mine." Pausanias, once the hero of Greece, died not by sword or poison, but by hunger, entombed in the sacred silence of a goddess's shrine. But even in death, he would not be allowed to rest. When the dust settled, Sparta was left with an uncomfortable truth. In their desperation to rid themselves of Pausanias, they had committed an unthinkable act. They had violated the sanctuary of Athena. To drag a man to his death within the sacred bounds of a temple was more than political murder. It was sacrilege. The shame weighed heavily. The Oracle of Delphi, guardian of divine justice, pronounced judgment. Sparta must atone. And so, in a twist of bitter irony, they commissioned bronze statues in Pausanias' honor. A city that had starved him, hunted him, and entombed him alive now raised monuments to his memory. He became both traitor and hero, condemned and sanctified, a ghost Sparta could neither fully erase nor embrace. And then came the question that has haunted historians for centuries. Was he truly guilty? Herodotus, the father of history, leaned toward doubt. He suspected Pausanias had been undone more by rumor, envy, and political paranoia than by actual betrayal. Thucydides, more severe and analytical, believed the opposite, that the evidence of his collusion with Persia was undeniable, that he had indeed dreamed of overthrowing Spartan law to rule as a tyrant with foreign backing. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. What is certain is that Pausanias was consumed as much by his own ambition as by his enemy's suspicion. The man who had once stood as Greece's savior fell chasing a dream too large for Sparta to contain. And in the end, that dream buried him. So here lies the riddle. Was Pausanias a traitor or a scapegoat? Perhaps he was both. A man too proud, too arrogant to live within the confines of Spartan discipline. A man who tasted glory and hungered for more than Sparta could ever give him. And in the end, he paid the ultimate price. Betrayal by his city and abandonment by his own mother. If you found this story chilling, there are countless more waiting in the shadows of history. Tales of murder, deceit, and ambition gone too far. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next scandal history tried to bury. And if you're ready for your next journey into betrayal and conspiracy, click the video on your screen right now. Because Pausanias was not the only hero to fall into darkness.